Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com.
Welcome, everyone, to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast. I'm Carolyn Woodard, your host, and I'm so excited to be here today with my friend Matt, who's our Chief Technology Officer at Community IT, who's going to share some information about cybersecurity for the end of the year and going forward. So, Matt, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Carolyn. It's great to be here. My name is Matt Eshleman, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Community IT. And in my role, get to oversee and supervise our back-end cybersecurity team that helps keep all of our client endpoints safe and secure, and then also get to work with clients on their technology strategy and cybersecurity protection initiatives. So happy to chat today.
Is there anything cybersecurity-wise that this season, there's particular scams that come out, because it's the holidays, like, porch pirates or whatever, but for cybersecurity? Or is there anything that particularly you would want to do at this time of year? Or is that just not even a smart question? Like, there's just stuff that you have to do year round, so it doesn't matter what time of year it is.
Yeah, I think that there's probably a couple of things that would be good to do here at the end of the year as we kind of do the cleanup. A couple of things I'm thinking of would be, take a digital inventory of all the systems that you have and you use and that you have data. I think in our early cybersecurity playbook, we had a couple of things about looking at the third-party apps that have access to your account through Google or Facebook or Microsoft, because a lot of those systems, right? You say like, oh, I want to sign in with Google, or, oh, like, yes, Facebook can use this, this app can access my information. It's probably a good idea to go back and look at those systems to make sure that they are in fact still active, or they still need access to your data, or you still want to share that information. And so that's probably a good year-end cleanup piece to talk about, is just, a little system inventory. What apps and systems have access to my data, and do they still need it? So that would be a good thing to do.
It sounds like you're saying permissions, like just going back through, like, not only which of your staff have permissions to which things they're supposed to have permissions to, but also like for people individually, like maybe you want to make sure to go through all of your apps and reconfirm the things that should have permissions.
Yeah, I think so. So there's probably an organizational dimension of this. Like, if you haven't already, making sure that you're using groups to assign permissions to folders in SharePoint or Google Drive. Make sure that the sharing settings are still accurate. I know whenever I'm doing these security assessments, that's one of the things that I look at, is what is the default security sharing. And I think a lot of folks set up these systems a long time ago, and the default was, we're going to share and let everybody share anything to anyone. And that's not the best practice. And so being a little bit more intentional about how we're sharing data externally, given that it is so easy to do that with data in the cloud, but that may not always be the best idea. So having a data cleanup for both your organization in terms of group and folder access and external sharing, and then taking an audit of your personal data sharing as well, with some of those personal apps, social media apps, and that kind of thing, especially that allow access to other data brokers.
Do you recommend with Google, like when you're using Chrome, it'll prompt you all the time, do you want to share this? Do you want to save this password here? Is that something that is okay to? I always feel suspicious when any site is asking me to save something there, because I just think, well, why wouldn't I save it in my own keychain or my own password manager? So what's your advice on that?
So for me personally, I think my hierarchy of how I like to access systems is, number one, I really do like using the sign in with Google option. So if there's a way, you're accessing some new web service, or you're, subscribing to a newspaper or whatever, then using the option to sign in with Google as opposed to creating another username and password, I really like, because again, it makes it a lot easier to access. I think I have a little bit more control. I don't need to, save or remember another username and password. And I think the Google security controls, I think, are pretty good in terms of notifying when that happens. And so that whole process, I think, works really well. And so that's the number one thing I like to do for my personal access is sign in with my Gmail account and just use the Google account. So that's probably number one on my list. Number two, if that isn't an option, I do prefer to save it in my own password management tool. So I use 1Password. There's a lot of other similarly good password manager tools there. And I like that because then I can access that, on many different devices and many different platforms. It's kind of not just tied to logging in through a web, like a specific web browser. So it's handy to be able to access that on my phone. And then, third option is, yes, I do still, save some stuff in my Google account, but I think you do need to be a little bit more intentional about that, because if you sign into a Google browser on some other computer, that password, all that stuff follows you, which on the one hand can be really great and convenient if that's, you're the only person that has access to that computer. But, if you sign into a system on your kid's computer and then they're like poking around and it auto fills some passwords, like that may not be a great situation. So I think, and specifically for us as a IT services provider, kind of having that, work personal divide be really strong. We want to make sure we keep all those passwords, in work systems when they need to be and personal when they need to be. So that's kind of my hierarchy and preference of password and access methods and tools.
If I can ask a follow-on question, a lot of our clients use Google Workspace. So if a nonprofit is using Google Workspace as their platform, it sounds like you would recommend they can use the Google password keeper
Yeah, I think
that's built in.
the Google Password Manager within your organization's Google Workspace account, again, I think is probably a good option. It's certainly better than nothing. It may not be as flexible or as convenient or as handy as, a third-party password manager, but yeah, it's way better than trying to remember all those different passwords or, I mean, writing them down honestly is not bad. I think that, gets, we like to ridicule that idea, but the physical security of a book, in your hand is pretty good. The worst option, yeah, is just using the same password over and over again for all these different for all these different sites. But, if you're in a Google Workspace customer, you don't really have the budget to do a password manager tool, saving those in your work Google account. That's a good start.
I think we often recommend something that's built in. If you're already using that platform, then you should use all the tools that are associated with it because they will automatically integrate with each other
Hmm.
better.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Google in particular, I think has added some nice new features into that password management tool. It'll tell you if you've reused passwords or if passwords have been detected in a breach. And so, yeah, there are a lot of really nice little features that are in those browser based password manager tools. I think the other stuff I think that I wanted to talk about is kind of reflections from the NGO ISAC conference that I went to that was really helpful in, kind of thinking again, seeing the cybersecurity threats from the NGO space, which are really significant because that space is really targeted. It's kind of asset rich. It's, got a lot of intellectual property, right? That state sponsored actors in particular are after. And so that's a really, it's a unique space that has resources to some extent, but probably needs a lot more to kind of come up to the level of the threats that they're facing. The so I think there's a
Can
whole
you just introduce what conference is that? What does that acronym stand for, and what is
sure.
it about?
Oh yeah, actually, let me look up what ISAC is because I don't actually know what ISAC is the acronym for.
I mean, I'm sure for people who are in the cybersecurity space, they're like, "Oh yes, that conference." But
There
for
we go.
who are listening, tell us about it.
So ISAC stands for Information Sharing and Analysis Center. So essentially, kind of a place to share intelligence about different cyber threats that organizations are facing. So I'm a part of the NGO ISAC, so the non-governmental organization, Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which is really focused on the unique threats that face think tanks, larger nonprofits, kind of foundations. So it's a little bit of a bigger tent than the small to mid-sized nonprofit organizations that we work with primarily. I think there is some overlap, particularly for the organizations that we support, like the policy and think tank world. That kind of has some of that overlap for some of the larger, foundations and typically organizations that do have more in-house IT capacity. So I was there at the conference as a representative of community IT, supporting a whole bunch of these smaller think tanks that don't have internal IT capacity. But the majority of the attendees at the conference were in-house cybersecurity people at bigger nonprofits and NGOs and kind of their partner organizations. So, there was lots of, third-party cybersecurity vendors that were there that do a lot of work and support these bigger organizations and have a lot of capacity. So again, a really good community to be a part of. I think the thing I've appreciated about the cybersecurity world in general is that it's very open and people share lots of information. And so it doesn't matter kind of where you are or where you're at, there's just a big interest in sharing. And so that's been appreciated. So so really good meeting up there.
Do you have some takeaways for us? Like, what are your reflections on like the top things that people are thinking about or the top threats they're worried about?
So in terms of the top threats, certainly it's things that we, see with our, small to mid-sized organizations as well, is that there's lots of targeted phishing, uh, attacks on digital identity. I think in the NGO and think tank space, right, that attack surface really goes beyond your work account because typically those attacks are targeted. And so these, threat actors know that your work account is probably pretty well protected, but maybe your personal account is not, or maybe your spouse's account is not, or maybe your kid's account is not. And so it really goes way beyond I think what we typically do for most organizations is, hey, let's, we're going to make sure we protect your work account, and kind of that work personal is really separate there. I think, your threat surface area is a lot bigger because you're getting targeted in multiple ways. So in terms of the takeaways from the conference are, I think just the importance of kind of defining and having a formal process for kind of managing your cybersecurity program, and that feedback loop. So again, we have lots and lots of near misses that people report, and making sure that as a cybersecurity resource in your organization, you always take time to look at, kind of have some meetings and look at what happened, how do we catch it, what can we do better, what can we do differently, and kind of update. So that learning organization piece is really important because things change quickly. And in cybersecurity, you're playing defense all the time. You have to be perfect or near perfect. And, so those weaknesses get exploited. And so just having kind of an ongoing process of learning and sharing and always evolving is really important. I think the other takeaway I actually took as a note that is that just cybersecurity is stressful in general. I mean, even more so than help desk. I used to joke when I was doing more direct support, right? The only time anybody calls into IT is when they have a problem. And so you're just like dealing with problems all day long. And so then I think cybersecurity, I think in addition to being problems, then it often, is amped up the stress because, could be a huge financial dimension to that. If, you have an account that's compromised or there's a ransomware incident in place. And so again, being able to invest in the kind of the mental health and capacity of your cybersecurity people is really important. And taking advantage of some of your work programs, through health insurance or other employee benefits is really important. And so there were a couple people that share like, oh, like they didn't quite realize it originally, but then, when they were doing their benefits renewal, they found out like, oh, like there are counseling sessions or mindfulness um, resources that are available. And so they're there. You should take advantage of them. And so that was one takeaway for me, for our team is just, oh, I know we just went through a benefits transition, right? So what resources are there available for kind of de-stress, mental health, kind of dealing with those super stressful situations that are just a part of it. Because, you can be intense for a while, but that's not sustainable. So
That is
yeah.
so interesting because I think you're right. It combines things that are i- elements of stress, like urgency, right? You have some incident happening, you have to respond right away on the weekend, whenever it happens, you have to leap into action. And so you're constantly primed to be able to do that, which is very stressful itself. And then often you're right, you're looking at some existential threats, right? If someone takes all of your money from your accounts or finds the information for your three major donors and they no longer feel comfortable donating to you, that is just going to really make a big difference to your nonprofit. And I think we found too that with our clients suffering a breach or an incident or a phishing attack, even if it was not successful, the hackers didn't get what they wanted. The fact that you've had an attack is so stressful to all of your staff. Like there just immediately becomes this new atmosphere of being really, really careful and kind of looking at everybody and trying to make sure everybody is trained not to click on those links. And it can be a very stressful period for any staff. And then if you've lost money, it's even more stressful. I had never really had thought about using those mental health resources through your benefits, but that's a great tip.
You can't have a conference without talking about AI. Right now, I think with a lot of new technologies, right? AI is just another new technology, and it's just a race to get people to use your platform. And so the governance and the safety controls are really being dampened because nobody wants to slow down. Because if you slow down, somebody else is going to get there first, and then they're going to be the winner. And in this world, you kind of got to be first, and if you're second, then you lose. It really subverts, I think, some of the safety and other kind of good governance controls, because you just want to get there as fast, and we don't want to worry about safety. Right now we're just kind of in a race to have a bigger technology to shoot yourself in the foot with. In nuclear energy, for example, right, the cost of nuclear energy, 90% of the cost of developing and implementing and supporting nuclear energy are safety controls, right? So it's 90% safety expense and 10% is actually creating the nuclear energy itself. But it's all about safety. In AI, I think some of the big firms are kind of aspiring to maybe have 10% be invested in safety controls and kind of these guardrails. But that's not even happening now. And so we've got this really powerful ungoverned resource that is just kind of innovating, and there's just very little being spent on safety of that tool.
I feel like we're going to have some kind of AI 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl, and then that's going to be what gives people the impulse to put the 90% safety in after there's been some big colossal AI problem. And everybody has all our data anyway. I also feel like like you said, it's kind of like an arms race. And even though AI itself is expensive, right? There are four big companies that are running all of the AI basically, but because they made some of these features free to, gain market share,
Mm-hmm.
kind of feel like the hackers, the bad guys they have a lot of incentives to monetize the AI that they have access to get at us. And so I'm wondering, it feels a little bit from my perspective like the companies are playing a little bit of catch up. Like, where is
Hmm.
the AI that's going to super protect our inbox?
Yeah.
We know
Yeah.
that the AI is out there with the phishing, emails getting better and better, but I think we're kind of waiting for some of those AI tools that will really zap them before they get to us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the technology tools that are out there, yeah, are being developed for good and for kind of defense, but it does seem like they should be better than they are. These hacker or criminal, cybercrime networks, right, are using the same tools that everybody else is to write compelling emails to trick us into, sending money and buying gift cards and updating our wire payment information. And so, yeah, it's these tools are out there and available for everyone to use. And so in cybersecurity, a lot of the things that we would have relied on in the past, the poorly worded messages, the misspellings, like that's kind of all out the window, because it's just easy to run all this through a free text generation platform and get a really, really, really well written email. So
Or voice generation.
yeah, voice
Or
generation. So there were a couple of those examples shared, right, in terms of uh, fraud schemes that were initiated, voice. There were a couple of scenarios where it was um yeah, kind of video was, also, part of that. And so I think, yeah, actually, this person also shared, how do you validate the identity of who you're talking to? And are there personal code words to kind of provide validation that you are who you say you are, not a recording? I think a case was shared. I think it was at Ferrari. There was a really sophisticated uh, video fraud against like the CFO or somebody in the financial department. And so they had invested a lot in the look and feel of this digital twin. And the person, like they had, a couple of suspicions. And so they asked about a book that they had like asked them to read, as part of, I don't know, some corporate exercise. And they didn't know that answer. And so while they knew all the financial stuff and some of the other things that maybe had been part of an email breach, they didn't know about this, the book that they had been asked to read by the person. And so then we're kind of like, okay. So it is interesting. So having some of these kind of offline, um, yeah, safe words, proof of life, proof of humanity, that, are important to have. And I think, yeah, I mean, we're looking at that, even for things as mundane as, resetting passwords from our help desk, we're investing in tools to kind of do that through a, automated uh, way that's trusted so that we know who we're talking to, because yeah, it's really easy to clone somebody's voice and kind of have that whole process occur. So
it's like out of a movie. And I think it's so interesting that you went to this conference that is, built around the nonprofit space and foundation space, because as we always say, I think a lot of nonprofits think that they're too small to be a target, or they're going to kind of be under the radar, or maybe they're a target, but only in this like mass email, mass phishing way. But really, when you do think about like those donor lists, the assets that you have, if you're working in advocacy and it's something that someone else would be interested in knowing, if you have, volunteer lists, children in your database, all of that sort of thing. And it's so easy to make a voice clone that is something that I think we're all going to have to step up our game for sure.
yeah.
Well, do you have any other bits of advice for us going into 2025? What should we be paying attention to?
Um,
AI?
yeah, AI, I think that kind of security, I think like, yeah, the safety and security around AI, some of this personal digital security. So maybe coming back to this original thing. So apparently Consumer Reports has like a really well done guide to data cleaning and removing your digital identity from like those data broker lists. So they have a really good resource. So the director of that consumer protection piece was there and talked about the resources that they have.
We'll put that in the transcript.
Yeah, there are a couple of services, I think, around that data cleanup that are consolidating a little bit, but there are some resources to help minimize your digital footprint.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Matt.
Yeah.
Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.